On June 20th, 2024, when 150 miles of Amtrak's Northeast Corridor collapsed. For nearly 3 hours, this entire stretch of rail on the busiest corridor in the United States lost power, and every train was brought to a halt. The next morning, a dead train in New York's Penn Station brought down the corridor again. More than 10 times in the last 2 months, Amtrak's electrical system has failed. Literally, while I was writing this introduction, I typed the words Northeast Corridor Transit Power Outage into Google, and sure enough, it happened again while I wrote the previous sentence. Over the last few years, this has been happening more and more, and specifically in the summer. Of all of the trains that were delayed in 2023, roughly 30% of them were the result of a heat wave. Crank up that heat a little more, and the Northeast Corridor could be as good as extinct. So why is this happening? Well, it probably comes down to the fact that the largest and arguably most important piece of passenger rail infrastructure in the United States relies on a single wire, and it turns out that that wire sucks. First, let's zoom in a bit. To some degree, heat waves can cause problems for any railway in the world. Most often, these problems have to do with the rails themselves. As the steel on the tracks heats up, it'll expand and create what are called sun kinks, where the track unexpectedly starts to curve, go over one of these too quickly, and all of a sudden, you've got passenger soup. Theoretically, this isn't supposed to ever happen. When tracks are laid, they're stress tested to withstand typical temperature conditions of whatever their environment is. It's just that in the last several years, the climate has changed. Maybe there's a term for that, I don't know, I'm not a scientist. Regardless, this means that unusually hot or prolonged heat waves typically require trains to abide by a new set of rules. When Amtrak's register over 131 degrees Fahrenheit, they'll cap train speeds at 100 miles per hour as a cautionary measure. Over 140 degrees, and they'll slow trains to a leisurely 80. You see the same sort of slowdowns in Europe, Asia, and Australia because they also abide by the laws of physics, but that, unfortunately, is where our climate camaraderie ends because now it's time to talk about the stupid wire. In the Northeast Corridor, specifically this route from New York to DC, the real vulnerability is not what's under the train, but what's dangling above it. This mess of wires up here is what's called a catenary. Go ahead and write that down so the next time you take a train with your friends, you can say, "Hey look, a catenary," and they'll know not to take the train with you anymore. Most of this is just a support structure, but this wire here is what we're talking about. This is the wire that provides a constant source of electricity for the train below. If something goes wrong with the wire, something goes wrong with the train, and that's bad news for the train because this wire is about 80 years old, and it's not really the right kind of wire. Let me explain. The Northeast Corridor uses not one, but 3 different, totally incompatible electrical systems to power its trains. There's one covering Boston and New Haven, one covering New Haven to New York, and one covering New York to DC. They did this not because it's good or effective or that it really makes sense at all, but because America hates trains and people who like trains, and yes, that means you. America hates you. You see, you probably don't remember this because you are, statistically speaking, 33.1 years old, but America didn't have any kind of national rail company until the 1970s. Before then, these different sections of the Northeast Corridor were operated by different private companies, specifically the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New Haven Railroad, and that resulted in these parts of the corridor being electrified at different times and in different ways. New Haven to Boston, for example, didn't have an electrical system until the year 2000, but when they built it, they actually knew what they were doing, so they made it beautiful and perfect, and it has no flaws, except for the fact that it results in people ending up in Boston. New York to DC, on the other hand, is a completely different story. The Pennsylvania Railroad electrified this route all the way back in the 1920s, and back then, there wasn't any kind of commercial electrical grid for them to use, so they decided to build their own from scratch. Now, it's hard to blame the Pennsylvania Railroad for doing this in an annoying way because, after all, they had only had electricity for as long as we've had iPads, and we still haven't figured out how to use those, but I'm gonna blame them anyway. The entire catenary from New York to DC was built to carry power at 25 Hz, a different frequency than the rest of the American power grid would eventually adopt at 60 Hz. That means that the electrical system powering all of these trains is super specific and pretty much entirely isolated. It needs its own special generators, its own special converters, all that junk, making it pretty much impossible to upgrade without tearing it all down and starting from scratch. And so when Amtrak absorbed the Pennsylvania Railroad in 1976, they got stuck with this system that's almost 100 years old, and because, if you remember that fact from earlier about how America hates trains, they have never been given the money to fully replace it. As you might expect, deferring maintenance on this wire for a full century has caused some fairly predictable problems. In Amtrak's own report from last year, they estimated that the reliability of the wire was, on a scale of 0 to 5, a whopping 1, with anything lower than 1 meaning that the wire literally doesn't exist. So folks, the wire is not doing well. But to make this a little more complicated, the wire was never good to begin with. From a physics perspective, this century-old wire wasn't installed with high-speed rail in mind. Frankly, if you showed someone from 1920 a picture of a Shinkansen, they would probably try to burn you at the stake, but that means that even if this wire wasn't literally decaying, it would still limit the speed of our trains, especially in the summer. Why? Well, it all has to do with what I like to call the droop factor. Modern catenaries, used for high-speed trains, are very carefully tensioned. Basically, that just means that there are a set of weights on the end of the wire that constantly pull it tight. If they didn't do this, the wires would expand and droop in high heat. And drooping can cause big problems. The main problem has to do with the fact that any waves created in the wire need to travel faster than the train under it. Otherwise, you're at risk of creating a standing wave in the wire and snapping it. If the wire isn't tensioned, the waves will travel slower, and any sufficiently high-speed train will break it. Secondly, drooping wires also have a tendency to get tangled in the trains themselves, which has the fun added benefit of destroying the wire and the train in one go. And thirdly, it looks kind of ugly. I mean, look at this. Ooh. Amtrak has been aware of this problem for at least 50 years now, and the best progress we've gotten was a grant in 2011 to tension 23 miles of wire here, which was then immediately reduced to 14 miles, and then they just seemingly did 7 miles and called it a day. So at that rate of 7 miles every 50 years, it'll only take a little over 15 centuries to fix the problem. And in the grand scheme of American public transit, that's technically a happy ending. But even if America did have decent trains, Europe would still be winning in one area: bread. The kind of bread you find in American supermarkets is bland, flavorless, and still somehow filled with sugar, and it's especially hard to find decent bread outside of large cities. I myself was resigned to my fate of eating mediocre bread for the rest of my life, at least until I discovered our sponsor, Wild Grain. Wild Grain is a really exciting, first-of-its-kind service that does something that I genuinely love. Every month, they ship you a box full of artisanal, handmade breads, pastries, and pastas. All of it comes frozen and ready to bake, so you can have a beautiful loaf of fresh sourdough or a tray of cookies whenever you want. You can assemble a box of whatever speaks to you: slow-fermented olive oil ciabatta, pretzel buns, fettuccine, blueberry biscuits, you name it. They always have seasonal specials to keep your options varied and interesting, and everything bakes in under 25 minutes, so it's never a slog. I never imagined I could be eating food this fresh and delicious at home every single day, at least without a huge hassle, but now with Wild Grain, my house is a bona fide bakery. Best of all, Wild Grain donates 4 meals to the Greater Boston Food Bank for every single new sign-up, so what are you waiting for? Start eating better by clicking on my link in the description and use my code HAI to get $30 off your first box, plus you'll get free croissants in every box.